we looked at a fairly large sample online content across 3 channels: TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, some of the most widely accessed platforms by young investors, Generation Z or Gen Z. There is a very high degree of trust in technology. So having a sophisticated technology platform is a way of building trust with young investors.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of The Blunt Dollar. Today's guest is Rhodri Preece, Senior Head of Research at the CFA Institute, one of the most globally recognized institutions in finance. Rhodri served as a capital markets policy director and has been a go-to source for media like the Financial Times and Bloomberg on complex market issues.
You have to take a dose of healthy skepticism when it comes to consuming online content. A lot of these social media platforms also make it relatively easy for the individuals themselves, the content creators, to make those disclosures. And I think the other important message is to not place too much reliance on any single piece of information. So if the standards are there and if the tools are in place on the social media platforms, the question is, why aren't these disclosures happening?
This is The Blunt Dollar with Ignacio Ramirez. Quick disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not constitute financial investment or legal advice. This content is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a substitute for professional advice. Always do your own research and consult a qualified advisor before making any financial decisions. All investments involve risk, including the potential loss of capital. And now, let's get started with the episode. Welcome everyone to a new episode of The Blunt Dollar. Today's guest is Rhodri Preece, Senior Head of Research at the CFA Institute, one of the most globally recognized institutions in finance. Of course, you've heard me talk about the Institute many times by now. Rhodri leads the CFA Institute's worldwide research agenda, shaping how the industry understands key trends across investing, policy, and market behavior. He's not only a CFA charter holder, but also a seasoned voice in capital markets policy, having previously led the Institute's regulatory work across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Before stepping into this global role, Rhodri served as a capital markets policy director and has been a go-to source for media like the Financial Times and Bloomberg on complex market issues. His recent work has tackled everything for the future of investor trust to the rise of Finfluencers. We're going to be talking, of course, a lot about that today, and what generational shifts mean for market behavior and regulation. In this episode, we'll unpack the evolving role of digital finance, whether trust in the industry is actually rising, and how new actors, from Gen Z investors to AI-powered advisors, are reshaping what professional advice looks like. Rhodri, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to The Blunt Dollar.
Great, Ignacio. Thank you for the kind introduction. Pleasure to connect with you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Super excited about this one. And what you must know is that I actually met Rhodri in person when we went to the CFA Institute Live 2025 Chicago event, which was a blast. You've also heard me talk about that many times. Make sure to attend the upcoming CFA conferences because they're absolutely amazing. And I can say, after meeting Rhodri in person, that he is the nicest person ever. So very excited about this conversation, Rhodri. Thank you for joining.
That's very kind. Thank you.
So before we begin, tell us a little bit about you. What is it that you're doing at the Institute exactly today?
Great. So as you mentioned, Ignacio, I head up the research team and the research activities within CFA Institute. We conduct research, we publish thought leadership, we engage with subject matter experts, and our aim really is to support the CFA Institute mission, which is to lead the industry by setting the highest standards of ethics, education, and professional excellence. So we're really mission focused. And the principle that we try to aspire to is to be a think and do tank. So you're producing research that can inspire professional understanding and knowledge creation and sharing, but you equip professionals with the tools to enable them to put those ideas into practice. So that's very much the ethos of what we're trying to do with the CFA Institute Research and Policy Center. As you mentioned, we're tackling a range of topics from areas such as sustainability to AI and data science to capital markets and how the changing nature of public versus private markets is evolving, as well as looking at the future of the industry. And some of the key trends there are around digitalization and evolving communications channels. And that really gets into some of the topics that I'm sure we'll get to today around influencers and social media.
Is there any topic in finance that you haven't covered during your almost 2 decades at the CFA Institute? I mean, when I was doing research for this episode, I kept stumbling upon, pieces of you from like 5, 7, 10, 12, 15 years uh, ago, and it looks like
Right.
you covered everything. The AI trend, of course, but before that, the whole ESG and sustainability one, transparency in capital markets. I mean, you've done it all.
Well, we've been following these issues for a long time and trying to make sure that we stay relevant with the evolving trends in the industry. So that, has meant that we've covered a fairly broad range of issues in my time at CFA Institute, which, as we were talking at the start here, is close to 2 decades at this point. But the trick, I think, with good research is being able to spot those trends and provide useful, informative content, so that people can see where the industry is moving to and prepare themselves to be ready for those shifts accordingly.
Mm. But the CFA Institute was not your first employer. Before that, you were at PwC, right? As an auditor for investment funds. What pushed you to change, to go from one to the other?
Yeah, that's right. I started my career in London, yeah, at PwC. I was in the assurance and advisory group and working specifically with investment management clients, focusing on investment funds. It was a great introduction to the investment industry. I got to work with some of the biggest fund management clients in the UK. And I joined in the graduate intake, had the chance to take the CFA program. So I had employer sponsorship to take the CFA. And obviously through that journey, that enabled me to really understand, where it is that I want to spend my time working and contributing my skills and developing that affinity with the CFA Institute through having been a CFA candidate and then a CFA member was an important part of that journey. So when the opportunity came to come and work at CFA Institute and contribute to what is essentially a mission-driven organization, that was a very exciting proposition for me. And I joined at a time when we were really building our footprint
Nice.
in the UK and in Europe, and over the past 15 years or so, it's clearly been a period of growth for the organization, and we're excited to see that continue.
Hmm. That's amazing. I mean, wow, what a journey! And I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's many people in the institute that have been there for so long as you. So I think it clearly speaks very well about the CFA Institute as an employer, and the fact that you're there must mean that you're truly enjoying what you're doing. I have a question about research. So obviously in finance, I mean, it's a sector notoriously known for the vast amount of information available, and your team obviously is tasked with cutting through all that noise and information and deliver like rigorous, actionable insights and provide uh, insightful reports. Um, what does impactful research look to you, and more importantly, how do you decide what's worth digging into?
Yeah, so great question. So let me start with the second one first. How do we decide what's worth digging into? Really, it's like any investment analyst is about having a mosaic approach to forming a thesis or a view on a topic, and to think about what are the important issues and topics that we should be tracking. We have to listen to our audiences. What are investment professionals seeing? What are they dealing with? What are some of the trends that are impacting professional practice and the broader investment industry at large? And that comes through talking to members, attending conferences, reading extensively. So reading, the news, reading research reports, reading journal papers, and
Yeah.
just building that mosaic of what are the hot topics that are really going to have an impact on the profession. And then it's about distilling those down into the ones where we think we can allocate resources to, where we think CFA Institute as a professional body has a unique opportunity to positively influence outcomes, and committing to those projects. So yeah, that's really our focus. And yeah, as I said, it involves just staying abreast of topics and thinking creatively. So being, a creative thinker, having ideation at the core of your sort of daily work process is important to being successful in doing research.
Mm. And how do you balance between those more like longer term thought leadership kind of pieces that sometimes are a bit more abstract with more near term and very specific reports that maybe answer more of the more pressing industry needs or the questions that practitioners have? How do you balance between the two? Do you have like cycles, and there's a period where you're like, oh, now I feel like more philosophical, I'm going to write more about long-term stuff, and now, oh, I want to get into the nitty-gritty of something super specific happening now or this year?
I think it's a bit like having a diversified portfolio, if I can use that analogy, really. But there are some pieces where you want to have some content that is current and catchy and is going to attract headlines in the news cycle and will impact practitioners now. You want to do some things that are technically demanding and rigorous, which maybe are more at the frontier of professional practice. And ultimately, that is core to doing good research, that you're trying to push the boundaries of knowledge and understanding in professional practice.
Mhm.
Um, and then it's also about thinking about those longer term projects where maybe you want to collaborate with some subject matter experts, write a book about a piece. It's really kind of that spectrum and having that portfolio approach to how you think about projects, and having a good balance of content across those different types so that we can make sure that, again, we're staying relevant and providing resources and content that's useful to investment professionals.
And what drives you to do this job? What drives Rodri to wake up in the morning and do research year after year? What keeps that drive alive? Is it the new things that you're learning? Is it the people you're meeting? Is it the exposure that you're getting out there? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of all of those things. I think it starts with just having that passion for finance and investing, wanting to understand the markets, wanting to understand the dynamics that are shaping the industry, and to have that intellectual curiosity to then try and unpack those dynamics and understand them at a deeper level, and then communicate them in a way that's going to be impactful and useful to investment professionals. So, a bit of intellectual curiosity, a bit of passion for finance, and then I think the other point, which I made earlier on in the conversation, is again being a mission-driven organization gives you a tremendous opportunity to take a step back, look at the big picture, and engage with the CFA network, which is huge. So we have
Mhm.
200,000 members globally. As you said, we had the chance to connect in Chicago just a few weeks back, and it's opportunities like that that really fuel your passion, because it allows you to connect with members and understand what are the hot issues in the different markets in which we operate, and that in turn fuels the ideation process and the research cycle.
Nice. I think that the best pieces of research I've read are the ones that have like some sort of actionable insight, something that you can really take away from the report and put in practice. And I wanted to ask you about that. Like, in your opinion, what differentiates the research that just gets read and you forget about it like a couple of days afterward, from the ones that from the research that actually gets used and that practitioners can use in their day to day?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's something that we think about whenever we're writing research papers. So you've got to address that so what question. Why should someone care about this piece of research? How can you convey the importance of the findings to a practitioner?
Mhm.
How is this going to change or affect their jobs or their businesses or the industry that they're operating in? So having thinking about the audience is crucial in how you communicate these pieces. And as you say, some of the things that we do will have recommendations for an investment practitioner audience. Some of them will be relevant to a policymaker audience. Again, that's an important constituent, because they set the rules that shape the industry. So being able to engage in those discussions and trying to positively influence policies and regulations is an important part of what we do. So again, it's just really understanding about who is the content for, and positioning it accordingly with some hopefully some sharp takeaways and recommendations.
Very nice. So, of course, now I'd like to speak a little bit about the work you've done on Finfluencers. Anyone that knows me knows that finance within social media, it's a topic very close to my heart. I like to post on LinkedIn regularly. And last year, you wrote a paper that was absolutely amazing called The Finfluencer Appeal: Investing in the Age of Social Media. It's freely available, by the way, on the CFA Institute's website. So just Google The Finfluencer Appeal, CFA Institute, and you will get access to it. There's a lot of crazy stats in there. Like I just wrote a couple of them, but to give you an example, 37% of Gen Z investors in the US cite social media influencers as a major reason they started investing. Obviously, this has major implications. So I have a lot of questions about this for you. So to start with, what initially drove your attention to the influencer space? And if you had to single out one thing, what surprised you the most in the research you made?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier on, one of our themes is the future of the industry and trying to understand those trends that are changing industry practices. And social media is not a new phenomenon, but how it's being used to market, distribute, sell financial products, to deliver financial advice is a relatively new phenomenon, and that poses challenges to existing financial advisory practices, advice businesses. And also, it creates new opportunities, I think, for firms that want to have a new distribution channel to partner with social media influencers that deliver online content that can help promote and market their products. So we really want to understand this trend.
Mhm.
What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are the risks that come with using a new medium like social media and online influencers to promote investment products and potentially to give investment advice? Um, to understand that issue, we looked at a fairly large sample of online content across three channels: TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, which was cited as some of the most widely accessed platforms by young investors, Generation Z or Gen Z,
Mhm.
those aged between 18 and 25 years old. And we wanted to understand, particularly the young investor, what are their habits, preferences, motivations? Why do they use this online content? So what probably didn't surprise me is the popularity of these channels for young investors. These are the so-called digital natives. They've grown up used to using their smartphones, accessing information through apps on their phones. And so it's almost second nature for them to seek out information about finance and investing topics through their
Mhm.
phones, through social media platforms. So that clearly poses an interesting dynamic for the investment industry. What perhaps did surprise me is that a lot of this information can be very beneficial. So it's providing um, young investors with access to finance and investing. It's maybe encouraging them to participate in capital markets at a younger age, which can only be good for their long-term um, goals, whether that's saving for a home or to provide for retirement or other sort of life choices that will come further down their career journeys.
Mhm.
There's a lot of positive aspects to this, but we did find that there was a lack of disclosures around when someone was promoting a product, for example. So if you're advertising and promoting a product, there are certain laws that require you to make a disclosure to say this is a promotional video. Those are often lacking. And I think for a relatively uninformed younger audience, it can be hard to distinguish between what is genuinely information of an educational nature versus what is uh, promotion and sort of advertising a product, and where does the line land between, as you said, guidance versus recommendations? So there's a few gray areas that we uncovered in the research.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, spot on. And actually, following up on the first research, the CFA Institute did a second influencer research report, but more specialized on India, if I'm not mistaken. And something I read there was, I mean, one of the striking things is that a lot of influencers in India are providing advice, but very few are licensed. Like 2% of them are licensed, but a third of them are offering like stock recommendations, which obviously is a big red flag. You already touched upon it a little bit, but what are the biggest risks that come from this mismatch between having very large reach and influence and accountability or no accountability?
Yeah, I think you touched on a key point there around licensing, and um, you see a lot of influencers online that are promoting products or making recommendations, but they don't necessarily possess qualifications, or they don't possess the necessary regulatory authorizations to do so. And if you don't make those disclaimers up front,
Hmm.
how will a consumer know whether some information is any good or not? So is it coming from someone that is professionally competent in that field versus someone that could be just telling you their views, or giving spot opinions on something without any reasonable basis for those opinions? So that is a risky area, and one of the, I think, takeaways from this work that we've done is that it is important for consumers, for investors that are consuming this content, to try and understand the motivations of the influencer. So again, do they possess qualifications? Are they looking to receive remuneration for making these online posts? Um, Again, what are their goals, and are there conflicts of interest that the consumer should be aware of? So you have to take a dose of healthy skepticism when it comes to consuming online content. And I think the other important message is to not place too much reliance on any single piece of information. Again, it's like, back to what I mentioned at the start, when you form an investment decision, you need a mosaic of inputs, and social media can be an important part of that, but it's important not to place all of your reliance on one particular single piece of content.
100%. And I fully agree. Like, take everything you read online with a pinch of salt. Another piece of information, very useful sometimes, but um, yeah, do your proper research and don't take anything for granted because there's a lot of misinformation out there too.
Yeah.
Um, so, two questions. First of all, like in the study you did, you didn't include LinkedIn. Why was that?
Hey there, quick favor to ask. If you enjoy the blunt dollar, the unfiltered takes, the stories, and the laughs, the easiest way to support the show is by tapping that subscribe button right now while you're listening. And here's my promise. If you do, I'll keep bringing you honest conversations, fresh perspectives, and the kind of finance talk that's engaging, insightful, and worth your time. Thanks so much for being here, and let's keep these great finance conversations going.
Yeah, so that was purely a sort of a research scope question. So in an earlier study we did, where we partnered with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation in the US, we asked what are the most popular channels that Gen Z investors use to consume online content, and the top three were TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram.
Yeah.
So we limited our scope to those platforms. Now, if you were to look at a broader sample of investors, let's say those over the age of 25, I'm sure that there would be other platforms that would be very popular, like LinkedIn. But again, for the purposes of scope and resources, we limited it to those three platforms.
Okay. Interesting. Hopefully you can include them in the next report. That would
Right,
be amazing.
right.
So you were talking about disclosure. The fact that a lot of in your report you highlight that a lot of influencer content lacks clear and proper disclosures when it involves, for example, affiliate links or promotions or things like that. In your opinion, why are disclosure standards so weak in this space? And in the ideal world, what would good practices look like?
Yeah. So, firstly, I don't think that disclosure standards themselves are necessarily weak. That I think the advertising laws are pretty clear when you're promoting a product, or if you have some affiliation with a third party that you're providing links to a third party site, you have to make a prominent disclosure of that fact. So that
Mhm.
the laws are clear. And a lot of these social media platforms also make it relatively easy for the individuals themselves, the content creators, to make those disclosures. So typically, if you're on YouTube, there's a box that you can check that generates an automated caption, that's sort of a standard disclaimer that this is promotional or advertising material. So if the standards are there, and if the tools are in place on the social media platforms, the question is, why aren't these disclosures happening? And I think that comes down to possibly two things. One is that there is a lack of understanding of the laws and the requirements that are expected of online content creators. So there's a bit of education that's needed there, and probably proactive engagement between regulators and online influencers to make sure that they understand what's expected of them and how they should be complying with laws and regulations. I think the other part is possibly a behavioral dimension to this. So we did some focus group interviews with young investors. And one of the things that we found was there's potentially a reluctance to consume content where someone is seen to be advertising or pushing a product of some nature. So there may be a behavioral disincentive on the part of an influencer to not check that box because they may be worried that that might result in fewer views or fewer hits on their video. So that's just another issue that we have to understand a bit more fully, but should be part of those proactive conversations between regulators and online content creators.
Yeah, but it's just so challenging, right? Because each region has its own regulator, and obviously, this information that is posted on social media travels across borders. So at the end of the day, you would have to make everyone sit down around the table, all the regulators from around the globe, and getting everyone to agree on some sort of framework for everyone to follow. And I guess that's where the complexity lies, right? Like, it's never been done on a global scale, and I don't know if it will be ever done. What do you think?
Yeah, it's challenging. I think what you're hitting at there is the fact that regulators have jurisdiction over their particular national market, but obviously social media doesn't respect national boundaries, and content can be consumed globally in today's modern communications and so forth. So that is a conundrum that does need to be addressed. We do think that there is scope for regulators under the umbrella of an international organization like IOSCO, the International Organization for Securities Commissions, to work constructively with national regulators to agree on some principles or some standards, to try and harmonize a little bit the definitions and the frameworks that are in place at the national level. And I think some work is happening in that direction. But clearly, right now, there are some divergences between national standards.
Yeah. I'd love to I'd love to be able to help on that front or participate at some point. So hopefully I manage to get in and become part of that conversation, because it's definitely, yeah, a very important topic, very close to my heart, and I think it can make a huge difference for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So trick question for you. Some argue that financial influencers are helping to close the financial literacy gap, especially in countries where people have like limited access to professional financial advisors. Do you do you think these influencers are more a threat or an opportunity? How do you see them?
Yeah, I think broadly, I see it as an opportunity. So I do share that concept that if you look at participation in capital markets, typically there is a large sort of underserved segment of retail investors that either can't afford advice or don't wish to pay for advice, and they may sort of historically have been effectively shut out of investing and not participating in the markets. I think the availability now of information online changes that dynamic a little bit. It's possible that influencers can address that advice gap, if you like, and when you combine that with the reductions in costs and increases in market access that have become available through new online platforms, particularly in the retail investing space, where it's now possible to invest commission free on any number of platforms. That does, increase access and potentially democratize investing more. So I think that that's an opportunity. I think for existing financial advisors, I think the key is to understand, do you really understand your customer, and can you meet them where they are, and can you evolve your engagement practices to embrace technology? because again, we know that younger investors are, as I said earlier, digital natives. They're used to engaging with content online and through their smartphones. So that is something that I think traditional firms and advisory practices have to contend with and think about their technology platform. Because I think if you can do that, then you can compete very well with, I think, the online influencer channel, because at the end of the day, financial advisors are professionally qualified, and they're regulated, and they are held to high standards of ethical practice.
Yeah.
These are things that will always be valued by investors and by clients. So there is a chance there to differentiate yourself in that regard.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Like, what should traditional firms take away from this rise of influencers, right? Because I feel it's like a bit of uncharted territory. Uh, no one really knows how to deal with them, and content and personality are often trumping credentials. And yeah, I agree with you. Like, there's a massive opportunity, but it's a bit of the Wild West right now, and no one really knows how to deal with them on the institutional
Yeah,
side.
and I think there's time, but not a lot of time. So let me explain that a little bit. So if you think about traditional firms, they are primarily focused on catering to, let's say the high net worth segment, or at least the mass affluent segment. So it's high mass affluent, high net worth, ultra high net worth. The people that are consuming online content are typically young. They typically have, relatively small account balances,
Mhm.
and not the typical clientele that would be seeking traditional financial advisors. But if advisors don't think about how are they going to engage that young audience now, would it ever be the case that these young investors that have grown up, become accustomed to making decisions on their own, seeking information online, would they ever then become future clients of traditional advisory firms? So
Yeah.
I think you have to think about how do you catch that emerging client base now. For me, that comes down to technology and trust, and focusing on the differentiators, which really are, professional knowledge, competence, and ethics.
100%. And I think also what's really interesting about this trend that we're witnessing is the concept of trust and how it has evolved over time, and the fact that influencers enjoy high trust amongst these younger generations who find them more relatable than institutions obviously represents a huge opportunity. But I wanted to ask you about that. How, what does this whole trend tell us really about how trust is formed today? How should traditional players respond? And yeah, is this the end of the finance industry the way we know it?
Well, I don't know about that. I'm not going to make bold predictions about the end of the finance industry as we know it, for sure. But you make a really important point about what are the drivers of trust.
Mm.
We actually did a study on this in 2022. And we know that actually for young investors, there is a very high degree of trust in technology. So having a sophisticated technology platform and a digital engagement experience is a way of building trust with young investors. For older investors, it's not quite the opposite, but there is certainly much more trust in traditional human advice, and we know that older generations prefer that human high touch engagement. And that's really a hallmark of trust. So that does create a challenge, I think, for firms, that they may need to think about how do they personalize their communication and client engagement strategies to meet the needs of their the different generations of investors. But it does come down to really personalization and the use of technology and the blending of those two things in a way that can engender trust. And I think the other key point is transparency. So that's clearly an important principle, and a concept that CFA Institute as a professional body often advocates for. But you have to, you have to be clear in your communications, explain to your clients why you've reached a decision or how you're using technology to support their objectives. And if you do that in a clear way, then you can build trust. So clear communications, transparency is always, a hallmark of engendering trust.
Mm. And for our listeners that haven't had the time to read the report, or I don't know where to find it, and want maybe a summary, what are the main recommendations you come up at the end of your report? Like the 2, 3 things where you say, okay, after all our research, this is what we think you should do.
Yeah, so we have recommendations for firms that are working with influencers. So making sure that they are
Mhm.
aware of the obligations and requirements of them, and that there's regular compliance training to sort of mitigate those instances where there is online content that doesn't comply with laws and regulations. For consumers, again, it's about understanding the motivations of the influencer. Do your homework and don't place too much emphasis on any single piece of content. And for regulators, it goes back to the conversation we had around aligning standards, and can we, move in that direction so that there's less inconsistencies across jurisdictions around, what it means to give a recommendation? How do you define financial advice, and how do you address instances where, again, content increasingly is being distributed via social media? So there's recommendations there for firms, for regulators, and for investors.
Very nice. 100% recommended. Once again, if you haven't read it yet, fantastic piece from Rodri and the team. And I would totally recommend having a look at it. I want to dig a little bit more on something we touched upon whilst we were talking about Finfluencers, which is Gen Z, because I think it's also a big topic and something that you've been looking into. Um, well, first of all, for our listeners that are not familiarized exactly with the ages and all of that, what defines Gen Z as investors? What are the ages that you consider a Gen Z to be belonging in?
So, for the purposes of our work, we use the age group between 18 and 25. So
Mhm.
actually, Gen Z or Generation Z goes to a younger age group than that. But obviously, for all practical intents and purposes, when it comes to investing, we
Mm.
use 18 as sort of the lower cutoff for that group. So we're really
Okay.
looking at those between the age of 18 and 25.
And in a couple of words, can you maybe tell us from your findings what do they how do they differ from previous generations in terms of investing expectations, behavior, what motivates them, how they learn, apart from obviously the social media channels that we just alluded to, what makes them
Yeah.
so different?
Well, so aside from again their preferences for social media, we know that they generally have higher risk tolerances. So again, we did a study with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. We did a large-scale survey of Gen Z investors. We conducted focus group discussions with young investors, and we know that they have a preference for risk taking. Now, that may
Mhm.
reflect the fact that they're younger, so they have longer time horizons. They can afford to have a higher risk tolerance. That higher risk tolerance is also reflected in their asset allocation preferences. So we found that around about a quarter of the typical account balance of a Gen Z investor was invested in crypto assets, for
Mhm.
example. And crypto is often a sort of an on ramp to investing for this age group. So again, that's quite a different way in which people are introduced to investing compared to older generations. So yeah, risk is clearly a differentiating characteristic. And then thinking about people's objectives, why are you investing? What are your goals? That really differed by across different markets, but it typically involves things like wanting to have sufficient money to go traveling, wanting to have sufficient money to buy a home. So really lifestyle choices featured quite highly in the goals and preferences of young investors.
Mhm. So yeah, one thing seems clear from your research is that there may be more risk taking than previous generations, but do you feel they're more misinformed or less prepared, or that's just like a stereotype that is not necessarily true?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think there's probably some of that, but I do think that um, again, if you're young, maybe you have fewer dependents, for example, and you know that you can afford to take risks because you maybe don't need the money for a number of years. So that does differentiate them from older generations. But I think it's certainly true that financial literacy levels generally are low, and that is a problem across societies globally. So in the focus groups that we conducted for this, we found that either, we typically did these focus group conversations with about 7 Gen Z individuals, and typically either 1 out of 7 or 2 out of 7 at most had received any sort of formal financial education in school or subsequent to school. So most people are not exposed to concepts around finance and investing, and that is a risk factor right there.
And I'd like to invert the way we look at things usually, because we usually talk about what Gen Z can learn from previous generations and so on. But what about the other way around? What do you think older professionals and traditional firms can learn from how Gen Z thinks about money and investing?
Yeah, so I think it's about again staying current with understanding the needs of the client, understanding the needs of the consumer. Personalization is a theme I've touched on in this conversation, but younger investors expect more personalized experiences. That's true across any product or service that they consume, and they have the same expectations when it comes to finance and investment. So I think that's a challenge. But in the age we are today with big data and AI, we have much more tools available to us as organizations to create more bespoke, personalized products and solutions to cater to those needs. So I think that is something that firms, older generations, your traditional advisors can think more about, is how do you harness data and technology to deliver those more personalized investment products and solutions.
Glad you brought that topic up, Rodri, because that was the big pillar I was hoping we would get to. Another topic that I know is very close to both of our hearts, AI. Obviously, I mean, capturing all the headlines at the moment at the CFA Institute Chicago conference. I think every single panel talked about it at some point or another. So yeah, my feeling is that we are at the cusp of a pivotal moment where advice is no longer defined just by human expertise, but obviously AI is entering everything, all parts of the finance industry, from financial planning to portfolio construction, I mean, you name it. So the $1 million question that I like to ask almost all of my guests, how do you see the role of the financial advisor evolving in this new AI-powered ecosystem?
Hey there, quick ad break. Do you work in the finance industry and have a genuinely interesting story to share? I'm always on the hunt for great guests who bring raw, unfiltered insights to the table. Or maybe you know someone with a story worth telling? Please put us in touch. You can reach out to me directly via LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, so it's a really great question, and I think it's a question that we hear regularly from CFA members from when we attend conferences. Everyone wants to know, how is their job going to change? Will they still have a job? Is AI going to take over
Am
what
I
they
going to
do?
lose my job or not?
Right,
That's the question.
right. That's the question. And I think our base case scenario is that roles and skill sets will evolve. And I think the most successful individuals will be those that know how to use AI and to incorporate it into their process, not only to realize efficiency gains, but to think about how they can deliver. They can make better decisions. So we do believe that with all AI, it's important to have a human in the loop. We often talk about this concept of AI plus HI, AI plus human intelligence. And that combination really leverages the collective intelligence and complementary skill sets of humans and machines. So if you think about what machines are good at, it's parsing large amounts of data, doing calculations, providing data-driven insights, whereas humans are very good at things like building relationships, having empathy with clients, having those soft skills so that you can communicate the value of a particular decision or an investment proposition to a prospective client. So I think the successful professional firms will be the ones that can get that combination right. So for us, I think it's not so much about job replacement, but about job enhancement by using AI and thinking about I think all professionals will need to have an understanding of how they can use these tools, but they also need to have the soft skills because that's what will give you a competitive edge in an era where machines are set to, take on a number of the more repetitive tasks that traditionally were done by humans.
100%. I'm actually curious to hear, like, because research is clearly going to be massively disrupted by this. I'm wondering, like, are you already using AI for your research and your reports? And are you actually worried as a researcher about your job, or how do you see the future?
So yeah, that's an interesting question, and there's a number of applications where you can use AI tools to assist in the creation of research. ChatGPT released something called Deep Research, which potentially allows you to just have an AI write an entire research report for you.
Mhm.
So there's a lot happening in that space. Um, what I think will happen is that there will be a premium on human cognition and human thought. So what AI is great at doing is harnessing insights from the vast corpus of data that sits in the training databases of these large language models typically. But there is an inclination, a natural inclination there in the way these models are constructed to give the consensus opinion. So being able to think creatively and challenge conventional wisdom, I think there will be a premium to that process. And so that for me means that there is definitely an opportunity for human researchers to, again, come up with new and innovative ideas to challenge creative thinking. When it comes to the work that we do, clearly we can use AI to help us summarize documents, to proofread content that we're creating. But the actual material itself is still human generated. And again, we still believe that humans have an edge here in being able to communicate and convey findings that are relevant to our audiences. But it's
Mhm.
evolving, and it's evolving so quickly that we just have to keep track of this and stay current. But again, I do believe that this is about enhancing human capabilities rather than necessarily replacing them.
I'm like you. I'm an optimist. I think this
Yeah.
is a tool that is enhancing our capabilities and is going to help us to just become a lot more productive. And we need to stay current, as you're saying, and become part of the change to avoid being oblivious. Avoid being useless over time. So
Right.
that's the strategy I'm adopting, at least. Like, I'm trying to stay super informed and familiar with all of these tools. But then if I read from what you're telling me, and maybe going back to the broader financial advisory profession, like the parts that you think are irreplaceably human are mostly the ones linked to creativity. Then is that it?
I think it's creativity, it's empathy, and it's relationship building. And I think particularly in the sort of, let's say, the higher net worth client segments, there is a premium on that human engagement that I think you can't replace with a machine. But you can use machines to help, as you said, give you better insights and produce more personalized services. So I think
Mm.
it's really the combination of those two things.
One of the other people we had on the show, Laurie Heinel, the CIO of State Street, asked her the same question, and she also mentioned intellectual curiosity. Yeah, as one of the things that can differentiate us from machines. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of important keywords there: creativity, empathy, relationship building, intellectual curiosity. Um,
Well, and critical thinking as well. I would add to that.
mm,
We all know the limitations with AI outputs as well when it comes to giving you the consensus opinion or potentially hallucinating. So being able to challenge and think critically and think differently, it has always been an important skill in the investing industry. It's just as important today when it comes to using AI.
100%. Now, to play devil's advocate, I must say that this thing is moving so fast that we are talking about AI and making assumptions according to the state of affairs today. But, 5 years, 10 years down the road, it's going to be so different that we may not even realize how disruptive it's going to be. And maybe AI at some point has more empathy than us. I don't know. Like, we'll see. But if I had to put my chip somewhere, for sure, I would try to focus on those things. as the most inherently human ones that are going to be harder to replace and that are going to be most useful in the future. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and then yes, so what are the best advisors doing in your opinion today to stay relevant with these trends? In your view, what are some good practices that our listeners could already put in motion today to stay current and to become the leaders of tomorrow, and by using all of these technology?
Yeah, I think a key word when it comes to embracing AI and technology is experimentation. So there are so many new tools that are coming out almost on a weekly basis, that you just need to try and experiment and see what works. And the whole adoption of AI in the investment industry is in some senses one great experiment. So we don't yet know exactly what are the best use cases of AI for a particular task or particular part of your investment workflow. But we know there's a lot of experimentation happening, and I think it's good to just try and see. You've got to think about, obviously, your organizational context. What's the risk appetite? What are the constraints in terms of your technology stack? Your budget to spend on acquiring potentially proprietary models. There's a lot of good material in the open source community. A lot of these models can be adapted and fine-tuned. There's increasingly a large number of data sets that are being made available as well that allow for training and experimentation in the open source environment. So I think good practice is to try and keep current and to experiment and to see what works. And one other benefit I would say of AI is that it's becoming more accessible generally. So it's not like you need to be a pure data scientist or very proficient in coding to be able to work with these tools, because you can have large language models like a chat GPT do the heavy lifting for you. You can interface in natural language and the coding can be done on the back end by the AI. So it's becoming more accessible, and that's going to facilitate more experimentation.
100%. Like a few years ago, you had to, open your Python spreadsheets and learn how to code a little bit to run some of these things. Now, basically, any of these websites allows you to do it super intuitively, which is
Yeah.
the beauty of it. Um, so yeah, so I mean, something that is becoming clear to me is that the future generations of advisors will need to master these tools. They also will need to be very grounded and have some way of training their emotional intelligence. Um, and I have a question for you as a CFA Institute employee. I don't know if this is top secret information or not, but how how is training and credentialing going to look like for people entering the industry, like in 10, 15, 20 years down the road, when the AI progress goes through the roof, and basically the jobs of financial advisors change significantly with all these superpowers are we going to get?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I would say that it's obviously evolving, and throughout its entire history of the CFA program, we have always undertaken a process that we call practice analysis, which is to understand how is finance changing, and how can we keep the curriculum updated and reflective of the skills, knowledge, and abilities that a professional would need to be successful in the industry. So there's no change really to that process or that philosophy, that you have to stay grounded in current practice and keep evolving the CFA program so that you're providing examinations and educational solutions that give people the skills they need to be successful. So really no change, I would say, from a philosophical standpoint. And the mix of skills and knowledge that goes into the development of these curriculum. It's hard to predict exactly what that's going to look like in 5, 10 years time. As you say, we don't exactly know exactly yet how AI is going to change every aspect of an investment role. There's a lot of experimentation happening, but certainly that's an area that we're monitoring, and we'll continue to keep our products and solutions up to date.
So for all the candidates out there, sorry folks, you still need to study 300 hours per level. But we'll keep you posted if that changes at some point. Um, and you haven't talked about personalization in this part of the conversation, but you mentioned it before. So do you think this technology will? I mean, what's the low hanging fruit here? Like, is it like the fact that we're going to be able to personalize content and advice a lot more than in the past, or is it more like that we are going to expand access to the market and information, and yeah, make it a lot more accessible for everyone? What is the main the main thing that is going to get disrupted over the short term? What is the low hanging fruit here?
So I think one area could be in creating personalized or customized portfolios. So
Mhm.
again, with data and accessibility to markets, if you're a client and you say, my preferences are to invest in this sector or in this region or in this theme, right now you can express those views through an ETF typically, but increasingly we're seeing platform providers create sort of custom baskets of stocks that reflect those client preferences. So again, that's doing it in a different bundle, a different basket than having those preferences being essentially packaged into a traditional wrapper, if I can call an ETF a traditional wrapper. So I think, yeah, more unbundling, more customization in portfolio construction. That's probably one area that I think is low hanging fruit. And I think the other one is in client communications, really. So we're already seeing a lot of this happen in the pensions industry, for example, where you can create more personalized statements and simulations of what your retirement balance will be in a certain number of years. You can use AI chatbots to sort of prompt conversations with beneficiaries so that they can engage more proactively and constructively with their pensions. So I think communications and reporting is a big area for personalization.
Very nice. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. We're getting close to the end of the conversation. So I'm going to ask you a couple of last, maybe more personal, more philosophical questions here, but I'd love to hear, first of all, a piece of advice that you'd give to anyone starting their career in finance today. What would you tell them?
I would say if you have the opportunity to travel and experience working in another country or outside of your comfort zone to do that, because I think that's very enriching, culturally, personally, and professionally, when it comes to really understanding different people, your different ways of life, and just to stretch yourself on a personal level. So that would be one piece of advice. And then another, a bit more closer to research, I guess, but just be an active reader, an avid reader. Just consume as much information as possible, because that's really what will help fuel your creative thinking and critical thinking skills. So consume lots of information, including social media and podcasts like this.
Awesome. Good. I didn't pay Rhodri to say that, just for the record. Um, and I mean, you've been in the industry for 2 decades, and you've seen a lot of trends take place. But more importantly, you've seen the emergence of more data, more access to information, more better technology, and so on. What's one change in the finance industry that um, from what you've seen that you're truly optimistic about for the next, let's say, 1 or 2 decades?
Well, maybe one is sort of more on a theoretical level. So if you think about finance and the types of models that um, you know have been traditionally taught in universities and also through the CFA program, they typically make a number of restrictive assumptions, such as normal distributions or log normal distributions. Um, and a lot of the models have been based on linear models. So it's a fairly restrictive approach. There's a lot of intuition, and these models are simple to understand, but they are limited in terms of their explanatory power or their predictive power. I think what we're seeing now with modern data science methods and AI is the possibility to use, non-parametric models, non-linear models that impose far fewer assumptions on the underlying relationships that you're trying to model, which creates a lot more possibilities for developing powerful models in terms of prediction or explanatory power. So that is an interesting development. This has obviously been happening over a number of years now, but is set to probably accelerate even further with the advancements in AI. So it's not to reject traditional concepts and theories, but it's really an augmentation of those, just made available by the power of new tools and data that we have at our disposal.
Talk about models. Like, have you made any research yet on the impact of quantum computing on finance, or is it still like too much in its infancy to be able to do proper research?
We have not published anything on that topic, but it's on our radar. I will say that
There's an idea for a
it's an
report.
idea. You've just given it
Awesome.
to us.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
Rhodri, it's been absolutely a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing all those amazing insights. As always, I really enjoyed this conversation. If you listeners are not following Rhodri on socials, please make sure to look for him on LinkedIn, for example. And more importantly, head to the CFA Research and Policy Center website, and there you will be able to find a lot of the things that Rhodri has written over the years. Plenty of interesting pieces, including the Finfluencer report we were alluding to before, and that are available in many instances to really anyone. It's not gated content, so make sure you check them out. Rhodri, thank you so much for all the fantastic research you're doing out there, and for advocating for the finance profession in such a positive way as you're doing. And yeah, I hope we get to see each other again very, very soon, either in, Chicago or London or Geneva. Who knows?
I look forward to it. Thank you very much for having me, Ignacio. Pleasure.
The Blunt Dollar is written, produced, hosted, and edited by me, Ignacio Ramirez. Everything you hear, concept, script, sound design, and production, comes straight from my desk, and occasionally my kitchen table. Thank you so much for listening, and join me in the next episode of The Blunt Dollar for more raw, honest finance conversations.